Here now with Jackson Takish of Farmer Mac, one of the economists that surveyed in the Ag Economist's monthly monitor, just got the results in from October. Some things stood out, some things just kind of even keel there, Jackson. But what was the biggest surprise for you this month?
Hey, Ted, well, I think, I'm not terribly surprised. I'll start with what I'm not terribly surprised to see is very much change in sort of the expectations on prices and incomes for the year. We got a lot of really new information coming out in the July, August, even in September timeframe. But when you get to October, I think a lot of those expectations are starting to settle down. We're starting to really dial into what 23 looks like and even starting to get a good picture of what 24 is going to start to look like. So I see the results. I think they're very tight in terms of the distribution of expectations at the economist level for prices, yields, what the net income picture looks like, the health of the overall farm economy. All those things really line up well with what's happening in the marketplace. And we're starting to really dial into what the USDA's expectations were at the later part of 23. So all that's telling me like, hey, we're kind of seeing what we expected to see in the drop in farm income. While pretty significant, maybe less important given it's just still a very high number historically. We used to making $100 billion a year in the sector. $150 billion is a lot less than 200, but it's still better than 100. I was kind of interested in some of the responses around the expectations for the Farm Bill, just the lack of consensus on extension of the Farm Bill and when we might see a new Farm Bill. So that to me was something I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, and before we go into the health of the ag economy a little bit more, let's hit on that Farm Bill a tad more, because we had mentioned, we interviewed one economist who thought that maybe it would be 2025 before we see a new Farm Bill. And the majority of economists agree with that. I mean, when I first thought 2 years from now, that seems crazy. But the majority of ag economists do think it could be 2025 before we see a new Farm Bill. But why?
Well, I think a lot of what people are reacting to is maybe a political reality of the election cycles, right? So 24 is not just a renewal of sort of the House votes and reelecting House memberships. It's also a presidential year. And historically, when you get the alignment of a farm bill with that presidential election cycle, you tend to see people want to wait until after that cycle to see what changes either colors over the White House or within the House of Congress itself. So I think that's what the economists are reacting to. Hey, this is a presidential election year next year. We've got some things we need to address in terms of budgets and funding of the government just in general coming up in November. So I think that's what economists are reacting to is the political realities of entering a presidential election cycle. And the ag economy is generally healthy. So a lot of these changes that you might typically see in a farm bill year, maybe some of them can wait with an extension of the existing provisions and budget allocations.
Yeah. So some of those economists saying there's really no urgency right now, not seeing enough financial pain in farm country to really see farmers and ranchers lobbying hard to see a new farm bill. So when you look at the outlook of the ag economy, are there any warning flags? Are there any, warning signs there that we could see some of these troubles really rear its head as we head into 2024?
Well, these things work in cycles. The agricultural, general economy, it comes and goes in cycles. And we are certainly at the turn of the agricultural economy. We saw peaks in 2022 of unparalleled record high net farm incomes, net cash farm incomes. No matter how you measured it, you're talking about almost record or over records. So we're coming off of that. There's almost impossible to repeat the level of farm income that we had in 22. So of course we're going to see some compression there. What I'm looking for is the revenue side. So the input costs went up in 22, parts of 23. We've seen some relief in some of those input costs. So I like to see a little bit of relief there for farmers and ranchers. So it's really about the revenue. So what happens to commodity prices in 24? And there I'm looking at the supply side. What kind of crop do we get out of Brazil? What kind of crop and yield do we get out of the U.S. next year? And that's going to really be the deciding factor into how farm incomes go in 24.
Interest rates, we've seen some of that discussion pop up a little bit in the Ag Economist monthly monitor. Also, the Kansas City Fed, Jackson, recently had said they are seeing more farmers kind of dip into their cash reserves, seeing, not as big farm loan requests that they've seen in the past. Is that something that Farmer Mac is seeing as well?
Well, I tell you what, balance sheets are incredibly strong. So we got a couple of years of really strong incomes. Farmers and ranchers stocked away a lot of that cash, rebuilt their working capital after several years of maybe tighter margins in 2018, 2019. So replenishment of that working capital was a welcome sign for lenders, but of course for those farm families. Turn into 23, you do see those higher costs of land, higher cost of interest, higher cost of labor. All those sorts of things start to eat into the cost of production, and that's when you do see you're glad to have the dry powder, you're glad to have that working capital because you may have to dip into it. For sure, that's happening. You see that come through in the farm balance sheets and income statements. You will probably continue to see it in 2024 if profit margins continue to tighten. But this is why I think good relationships with ag lenders, having that lifeline to capital providers becomes incredibly important. Having those relationships built because you can tap on the shoulder of your ag lender and ask for options, ask for that capital infusions, whatever it is, that partnership that lenders have with their farmers and ranchers out there. Incredibly important. Interest costs are likely to stay high. You look at what's happening in the economy. Great a GDP print for the third quarter today. That's going to give the Fed, I think, some more a cover fire to keep rates higher for longer. So I think we are not likely to see a great drop in interest expense this year or next. And farmers are going to have to adjust to that by either dipping into their working capital, or they're going to have to find ways maybe to cut some of that debt off their balance sheet.
Yeah. So you talked about it. I mean, overall, the ag economy still fairly healthy, fairly strong. Yeah, we're off the highs that we saw, but still fairly good. So within the ag sector, though, Jackson, what are you seeing as the commodities where those producers are seeing their financial situation erode a little bit more than others? Which ones are struggling the most right now?
I think right now you've got maybe your fruits and nuts specialty crops really coming off a couple of tough years with export levels down, prices down, just due to the strong dollar and export markets demand being a little off. So I think we start there, right, in the current situation. I think dairy's another one of those industries where you've had a couple of tough quarters with demand and prices. So that's going to be where we start. I think we're maybe rotating into a tighter profit margins for the grain sector. So that maybe 24's story is a little bit tighter profit margins for your corn, soybean, and wheat producers. And right now, I think cattle is probably if you're a cow-calf operator, you're really happy to see where prices have been this year compared to the prior few years. But the cattle cycle turns as well. And so I think you get into 24, we might start to see demand wane a little bit globally as well as domestically for those beef products. That's going to work its way back through to cow-calf prices. So I think we may be in next year talking about a little bit of a more compression in cattle prices, but not nothing like we saw in 2020 or 21.
Yeah, good to point out. Okay, a lot of insight there, but kind of wrap it up with a nice bow for us, Jackson. What is the biggest takeaway that producers should have from the October Ag Economist's monthly monitor?
Well, I think it's that the information that we expected to see is coming through. So those projections, all the great work and hard work that farmers and ranchers do to build their budgets and manage their 23 outlooks is looking pretty good, like it's going to be what we thought it was. So I think that's what the economists are reading, and what you're seeing in the output from this great survey work is that things are kind of playing out the way we expected them to, which should help alleviate some of that volatility and uncertainty that producers might expect in the fourth quarter. Sometimes there's always that last thing that happens, the Mississippi dries up and you can't ship your grain the way you thought. So there's those expectations. That volatility is probably a little bit less, as we head into the fourth quarter and start thinking about 24. However, I do think when you read into the tea leaves about 24, you are starting to see some more concerns about tightening profit margins, tightening those belts and the working capital levels. I think that's going to be the big story that we talk about heading into 24.
Jackson, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Jackson Takesh with Farmer Mac. You can see the latest results from the October Ag Economist Monthly Monitor on agweb.com.